go, we will rise up, rise up, rise.
Well, hello everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Wyatt Snyder. I'm the youth intern here in Connection Christian Church. I would just like to share a little bit about my recent mission trip to Nepal. I'm going to have a video playing as I'm talking, have some pictures about what happened, what we did and stuff. So I would just like to first off thank everybody who supported me either by buying a t-shirt or just sending me a check. I really appreciated it, and God did amazing things while we were over there. And I just really appreciate it. Just want to thank you all. So there was a team from Nebraska Christian. There was 9 of us, 8 students and 1 professor. And we met up with a team from Virginia that coincidentally my great aunt goes to. I didn't know that at the time, so it's a small world. It was kind of crazy. And so we fly, it's like 24 hours of flying. It was terrible. But we get over there Friday nights at about 9 o'clock their time, which would be about 10 a.m. over here. And we go straight to the hotel and we go to bed because we were pretty pooped because nobody could sleep on the planes because they were just super rough. And we get up, and their Saturday is like our Sunday, so we went to a church service that was about 2.5 hours away. So we were staying in Kathmandu, so we drove into the mountains to go to church, and we had 4 people who, one was going to preach, a couple were going to lead worship, and a professor was videotaping at the actual church service, and then the rest of us, we got to go to a little school building about a mile up the road and do a VBS with the kids. And we do that. It lasts about half hour. We're just done. We're like, church service is still going, so what are we going to do? We had balloon animals, so we started blowing them up. And then it was a pretty windy day, and then all of a sudden the roof just starts shaking really bad, and we're like, oh, that's not good. And then it really starts shaking bad, and then the teachers start screaming in Nepali at the kids, and we're like, oh, what's going on? And then they all start herding them out the door, and we're like, oh, they must think that the wind's going to blow the building down. So we all run outside, and we actually feel the earth shake. So it wasn't the wind, it was an actual earthquake, and it was the first earthquake. It was the 7.9, and I'm not quite sure. It just kind of felt like you were just kind of bouncing up and down for the first one, and it just lasted a good 35, 40 seconds. It just kept going, just wouldn't stop. And afterwards, all the kids, they were just crying. They were bawling their eyes out. The teachers were crying too. Some of them got on their phones, I assume, trying to contact family, seeing if the house was okay or if everybody was still okay. And eventually, the kids start rushing into the school building because they all take their shoes off before they enter a building, and all the teachers were kind of trying to stop them, but couldn't really do it because we assumed that was probably their only pair of shoes that they had, so they just wanted to get them. And so we're like, okay, the kids went in and got their shoes. We're going to go in and get our VBS stuff. So we go in there, and right when we get inside and start packing everything up, that's when the first tremor hit. So we had to run back outside and wait a couple more minutes. Eventually, we were able to go back inside, get the stuff out safely. And luckily, that building didn't collapse at any time, but the actual church building that the other people were in, later on that week, it did collapse, but thankfully nobody was in it at the time. Everybody got out safe on that Saturday. But the group from the church finally met up with us, and we had a guy named Stephen. He was our local Nepali translator, and he worked with Disciple Makers Ministry, which is the organization we went there with. And he's like, we're going to have to get you guys back to Kathmandu. That's the safest place it's going to be for you. But that was all of our first earthquakes, so we're like, oh, that probably wasn't that bad. Like, it really didn't feel that bad, but it was all of our first, so we didn't actually know that it was that bad. So, we're not going to contact our families. This won't make international news or anything. It wasn't that bad. But on just driving back 2.5 hours, we could just see it. We saw a couple of houses collapsed in the mountains, but it wasn't, too devastating until we get halfway there down the mountain, and we get pulled over by this family. And apparently, during the earthquake, there was this 80-year-old man and probably a 75-year-old woman walking along the road, and a landslide came and buried them in rubble. It killed the man, and it buried her. These people dug her out, and then they were starting to carry her to the hospital, so they flagged us down. And we had 2 Jeeps at that moment, so they put her in the first Jeep. Luckily, I was in the second Jeep, so I didn't really get to see too much, but what they described to me, she wasn't moving. Her face was all bloody, like there was just blood pouring out of her mouth and nose. It was really bad. And it was terrible. So we kind of start going really fast through the mountains. And these roads are like a single lane for us, but they could fit 2 cars somehow passing through it. And you would literally be an inch away from toppling over. And we were going probably 50 miles an hour down this thing, just trying to get her to the hospital and get us to safety. But eventually we met back up with our bus and our bus driver who, I don't know if it was because of the earthquake or what, but he was in a bar, so that was kind of scary. Had our guy drinking and But we made it back to the hotel, and that's when we met up with the team from Virginia. We just kind of got to get to know you, and we had to stay outside that day because they didn't want the hotel to collapse on us. They didn't know if it was structurally safe yet. So we just stayed outside. We kind of just got to know each other, and we had to sleep outside that night. And it got to about 40 degrees at night, and all we had were shorts, t-shirts, and a little blanket. So it was pretty cold. And then about 2 a.m. it started raining. So that was really fun. So we could not sleep because the tremors were still going. It was cold, rainy. And then at 5 a.m., right about as everybody got to sleep, there was this really big tremor that hit. And everybody, you just can't fall asleep after that. It was a big one. It was like a 6.4. And that just scared everybody and just woke us all up. So we were up for the day at 5. And since there were still tremors, everybody was kind of scared. They're like, we can't really have you go anywhere just because buildings were still falling down. Because during the night, when a tremor hit, you'd hear people scream and then a big boom as something would fall down. And so we just stayed at the hotel. We were kind of frustrated because we're like, God put us here at this moment. It was almost like we were here too early because we couldn't really do anything for the first couple of days. But as that day went and passed, we were just at the hotel. And then the next day, we finally got a bus and we got to drive around. And we went and we bought some water and a little bit of food. And we're just going to go hand this out. We're going to see who needs help. We're going to start maybe help picking up some rubble. But since the tremors were still going, nobody wanted help because you start picking up and then, another tremor hit and the rest of your house fell. It's kind of pointless. So we were driving around. Nobody wanted our help until we start going to this village. And they were kind of mad that we started going there because our bus said tourists only. So they didn't know we wanted to help them. They thought we just wanted to drive around and take pictures. And which is understandable that they'd be mad because if my house, got destroyed in an earthquake, I wouldn't want some random foreign people taking pictures of it. But Stephen, our Nepali guy, after about 20 minutes of, I would say, arguing with this guy, he finally let us come in. And they literally had blocked us off. They had a human blockade on the road so we couldn't get past. And they finally let us through. And we probably had 150 bottles of water and just a couple things of crackers. And that was gone within a minute. And there was a local leader named Emil. And he ran a little shop. And he had a whole bunch of food and water that we had to purchase from him so we could continue to hand out food and water, which was kind of sad because they had all the supplies there that they needed to help feed and nourish the people there. They just couldn't give it out because that was his livelihood, and he would go bankrupt and stuff. So we purchased a whole bunch of food. It was $50 in American money, but it was really a lot of food. But that went out pretty quick. After 10 minutes, everything was gone. So we got their contact information, and we just headed out. Went back to the hotel, just kind of crashed there for the rest of the day. And our original plan was to go to Chitwan, which is about 6 hours away drive from Kathmandu, and build an internet training center where local Nepali pastors would come in and get Skyped in teachings to kind of learn how to run a church. It's almost like their kind of Bible college. But it was also along with an internet cafe because it's illegal to preach or kind of share your faith with anybody. So they kind of, if they had just a training center for that, it would probably get burned down, especially since most of Nepal is Hindu. And so just trying to get there was just a fun adventure. So we chartered a plane, and we're supposed to fly out at 11 o'clock on, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday. It was Wednesday. And we get to the airport, the security was nothing at all. You really could have carried anything in there. It was kind of scary. And we eventually get down. We're 10:30. They're like, all right, your plane's going to leave in a half hour. So we're like, all right, we'll wait here. And then then this little lady, she's really short. She's probably not even 5 foot. She came up to us. She's like, it's going to be a little wait. We're probably a couple-hour wait. There's having some bad weather over in Chitwan. So we're like, okay, that's fine, whatever. And we wait a couple hours, and then she's like, all right, your plane's ready. You can take off. So we get on a bus. We drive to the plane, and we wait for another 2 hours. She's like, oh, the bad weather started up again. And we're like, okay, that's fine. We're just kind of getting to know each other. We're having fun. We're on a bus just playing weird little games. And the 2 hours is up, and they're like, oh, they're still having bad weather. So they send us back to the terminal, and we get back off. And the terminal, it just smelled really bad. I don't know. Just think of the worst bathroom experience you've ever experienced, and then multiply that by 10, and that's what it smelled like in the terminal. And it was really bad. So we waited another couple hours in there. And then eventually she said, they're going to continue to have bad weather, so we're going to have to cancel your flight for today. Come back at 6 a.m. tomorrow because your plane leaves at 7. And we're like, okay, whatever. So we kind of go back, and then we just walk around. We found this little tent village, and we just, they were all kind of bummed out. So we started making balloon animals for the kids and also the adults, because we made swords, and they were having fun too. And it was just really fun to, just lift their spirits. But then another big earthquake hit, and this one lasted another 30 or 40 seconds. But this one, you kind of like the entire earth swayed, like you would move 3 or 4 feet. And that one was really scary. But luckily, we were already outside, so we weren't too afraid. But there was this giant building we could see, and we thought for sure it was going to come down, but luckily it didn't. And that kind of, dampened the mood, so we all kind of rushed back to the hotel just to, make sure everybody was okay. And then we just kind of stayed there, had to stay outside for the entire time we were over there, just because the hotel had started getting cracks, and every day they would get worse and worse. And we're like, eventually, before the week was over, this part of the hotel is probably going to come down. Luckily, it never did, but it was super sketchy at the time. So we wake up at 5 o'clock to get to the airport by 6, and 6:30 we're in the terminal, we're waiting, and then she's like, all right, your plane's going to leave in 30 minutes. And nope. She's like, all right, there's going to be another delay. It's going to be like 45 minutes to an hour. We're like, okay, that's not too bad. And we get on the bus afterwards, we drive to the plane, we have another delay. And long story short, we get back to the terminal, we get back to the bus, we get back to the terminal, we get back to the bus. And at that point, we thought for sure they were just screwing with us, so we're like, we're just going to hijack this plane if they do not let us get on. Like, we were supposed to leave yesterday at 11 o'clock, and it's noon the next day, and we were just kind of just mad and frustrated. But luckily, we actually got to take off. So we took off at 1 o'clock, and it was only like a 20-minute flight, so we really could have drove, a 6-hour drive by the time we actually got there. But it was 30 degrees hotter over in Chitwan in a 20-minute flight. It was 60s in Kathmandu and then 90, 95 every day with like 90% humidity. So it was super fun. But we get to a hotel, and we were originally supposed to get there for breakfast, but that didn't happen. So they saved us some lunch, and we ate lunch there. We kind of dropped our stuff off in the rooms, and we go to the Internet Training Center, which is what we were originally going to go do. And a couple of us stayed back. We got to wash down the walls, make sure everything was okay, and then everybody else went and got paint. And, the washing the walls only took like 20, 30 minutes, so we kind of got to talk to the landlord lady. She didn't speak too good of English, but we got to communicate a little bit, and it was just fun to get to know her. And then eventually everybody else came back, and we started painting the walls, and then we had orange and purple, and we put the base coat down, and then we had to let it dry, so we went back to the hotel that night. We swam in the pool, which was really fun since it was really hot and the pool was nice and cold. And we went to bed, and then the next day we got up. We went to the Internet Training Center. Since we on the cafe side, we painted like the Facebook logo, the Google logo, and all that stuff. Since it's supposed to be Internet Training Center or Internet Cafe, and we're just doing fun stuff like that. While the other people, we got to set up the actual training center part, so we got to set up the internet, we got to set up all the, electronics and mount everything. And that was really fun. And then we got that finished in a couple hours, and then all the pastors came in, and we got to give them a little demo and got to pray over them and dedicate the facility to them. And that was one of the best parts of the trip, in my opinion, just seeing that the local church is not just here in America, that it's all over the world, that there is local pastors who care about their little towns like we care about Columbus over in Nepal, and they're wanting to share the gospel with them, and they're willing to risk their lives literally over there to plant a church and start preaching the gospel over there. And that was just an amazing experience just to be a part of and just to pray over them, witness that. And then they prayed over us, which was really powerful too, because when they pray, they all pray at the same time. It's not just one person who prays kind of quietly to themselves while everybody tries to listen to them, but they all just shout it out, to shout to God. And that was a really fun experience. I assume thanking us for doing all this. It was in Nepali, so I wasn't for sure. But once that all got done, there was a local church that was about 20 minutes away. They gave us lunch, and we were going to do a VBS over there. And the VBS was my favorite part, just all the kids. It was just amazing. There's about 60 kids, and we had a puppet show, and we had a color wheel, because they have a prayer wheel for their Hindu religion, and so we had a color wheel which had the 7 days of creation, which would kind of tie in with, since they're already used to the Hindu prayer wheel. And we did that, and that lasted another probably 30 minutes, and Well, the group from Virginia went and bought tarps, food, and blankets for the village that we were in previously in Kathmandu. So they were gone for like 2.5, 3 hours, and we were done in 30 minutes. So for 2.5 hours, us guys, we got to lift kids up. We got to like toss them around, spin them around, and just play with them, and it was super fun. All of our shoulders were sore the next day. We were dripping with sweat since it was 95 degrees and 100% humidity, and it was just my favorite time. I had this little girl, her name, it started with a D. It was kind of weird, but she just made my day. She ran up to me and she just told me to pick her up, and I picked her up and I kind of swung her around, and then she would not let go of me. I tried to set her down a couple of times, she just wouldn't let go, and all she was doing she was probably held on to me for 5 minutes, and all she was doing is just talking in Nepali. I had no clue what she was saying, but I was just smiling, nodding my head, just saying yeah, and she just made my day. That was my favorite part of the trip, just that 5 minutes right there, just her talking to me, smiling. It just broke my heart just to know that I'll probably never see her again on this earth. But eventually, after 2.5 hours of playing with the kids, getting to know them, having a great time, the bus came back with all the people with the tarps and the food and the blankets, and we go back to the hotel. And then we had to get a truck, and we had to ship all of the stuff over to Kathmandu because the planes, all the relief was taken up at all the airports, so we had to ship it out through that. And that was fine. It was pretty, like these tarps, like they were probably packed in like 12s, but each thing weighed like 100 pounds. It was really hard to lift it up, especially once you got to the last couple and like you had to pile it right on top. Those were really hard, and we thought for sure some of them were just barely hanging onto the trucks. We're just going to get there, and like half of them were going to be gone because they lost them along the way. But luckily, when we got back to Kathmandu, they were all there. But we're at the hotel that day, and then Saturday, they're like, all right, we're going to have to ship half of our stuff to Kathmandu today because the airplane can only support 20 pounds per person for luggage. And we're like, that's weird. This is a commercial plane. You'd assume that they would have enough space for more luggage. So we had to literally like unpack like most of our stuff and like just make sure we had enough for that day and ship it out. And then we went souvenir shopping. So that really wasn't the best idea because then everybody got like 20 pounds worth of random stuff. And we were all kind of scared, like, oh man, we're not going to be able to leave today because our suitcases are going to be too heavy. But I really don't think it mattered because mine was like 24 pounds and I still got on with it. And we flew back to Kathmandu with no problems. We actually went on the bus, went to the plane and took off. We had no issues that time. And we went back to Kathmandu. We got there late afternoon, and we went back to the village, and we set up a little station to start handing out tarps, blankets, and food. And the leader, Anil, he went around and assessed what everybody needed. He wrote a coupon for people saying if you needed a tarp, a blanket, or both, and then you got 1 scoop of rice per person in your family. So we set up a little station, and we were just handing it out, and eventually we were starting to run low on tarps and blankets, so we eventually stopped handing those out, and we just started handing out food, and Anil went back out and assessed who needed what, and then we came back the next day, started handing stuff out, handed the rest out, and we got to walk around the village, because we walked around a little bit of it the first time we were there, but like since they didn't really know us then, they were kind of still hesitant about us being there. So they'd only showed us a little bit, but then we got to know this teacher very well. She spoke really good English, and she took us around, and she was making it really personal. She'd be like walking around and be like, there's a totally destroyed house, and be like, yeah, that's this family, they got 3 kids, their entire food supply for the entire year is gone, and whatnot, and like, it was just super heartbreaking. So you go from like extreme joy of like handing people shelter, clothing, and just food to this sense of like, oh my goodness, like, their entire house is destroyed, they just really need help right now. And we did that. We walked around there for an hour, and I would say that 90 to 95% of all the houses were either completely destroyed or just unlivable. And they basically set up little communities with like a giant tent, and then they would make like a giant pot of rice for everybody. They really didn't have any other food with it. They would just have a giant pot of rice that they would hand out to people. And that was super heartbreaking for everybody, and especially we had a girl, Toby, she was an older lady from Virginia, and she was like the entire time we were walking through, she was just crying, and just her heart was broken. But afterwards, once we were done, she told the teacher, since it's illegal to share your faith, basically, but she's like, She's told the teacher that, our God is bigger than this. He's got everything. He's got it under control. We'll be praying for you. And then the teacher, she just started crying, like bawling her eyes out. Like you could tell that she was genuinely moved by what we were doing there and, the love of Christ. But since it's illegal to preach, we couldn't really go any further, but a lot of us friended her on Facebook, so I've been in contact with her a couple times, and and a lot of other people. So I just continue to pray for her and hope that, eventually she can come to know Christ, because their entire temple was destroyed in the village, and not to, over-spiritualize it, but a lot of the places that were damaged were like temples and highly Hindu areas, and we just didn't want to over-spiritualize it, but we kind of noticed that. And eventually, we get done with the village, we get done walking through, we say our goodbyes, and then we go back to the hotel, and then spend the night, and then it's Sunday, we kind of do some more shopping in Kathmandu. That's where all the bigger shops were. They finally opened, because the past week, they were just shut down because they just didn't know if, the buildings were safe. But eventually, the trimmers, they were still going on, but they were few and far between. So they decided to open up because they needed to start making some money to try to rebuild their lives. And we just started souvenir shopping, and I had a guy, Adam, with me. He taught me how to say "I love you" in Nepali. And every single time we'd walk back past a girl, he'd be like, "What are the odds you just go up to her and say I love you in Nepali?" And I never did. He never got me, but we came close a couple times. It was pretty scary, but we had some fun times. And then we got to the airport. We said our goodbyes from the Virginia team, and we took our flight back. We got delayed an hour and a half in Kathmandu, and we found out once we got to Chicago that the airport literally closed down an hour after we took off, just because the relief planes were just tearing up the runway. They just weren't prepared for it. So we almost got stranded there. And since we only had a 2.5 hour layover in Abu Dhabi, and since we had an hour and a half delay in Kathmandu, we were kind of stressing out about that. And because we had to go through customs in Abu Dhabi, because I think it's like an American-run airport or something over there. So we were all stressing out, and we got through the Abu Dhabi security really quick. But once we get to the American part, we show our passports, like, okay, you're Americans, you can come back in. The American security, I don't know what they were doing, but it literally took, I would say, 45 minutes to get through 30 people. And we were all super stressed out because we're like, our plane leaves in like a half hour. We got all these people in security in front of us. We still got to go through customs and everything. But for some reason, they opened up 3 lanes for guys and only 1 for girls. So all of us guys, we eventually got through pretty quick, but the girls were still stranded back there. So we all got through customs and everything. We're just sitting there waiting, all super stressed out because our girls were way back there. And they finally get through. We have like 10 minutes before the plane ends boarding. So we're kind of sprinting through the airport, and we get to the plane 3 minutes before it's supposed to end boarding. So we're like, whew, that was a close one. So we get on board, and then we have an hour and a half wait because all the non-Americans were still trying to get through customs because it was taking so long. So we had a lot of waiting. It was ridiculous. Our motto for the trip was hurry up and wait, because we had to hurry up through everything, and then we'd always have to wait. And so eventually, then we had a nice 14.5-hour flight to Chicago. I had a nice cheeseburger, which was pretty good because everything there was rice and chicken curry, and eventually I just stopped eating because I just could not take it anymore. It was really bad. And the cheeseburger was probably one of the nicest things I've ever eaten, at least I think. But then we get to Omaha, then the news is there for some reason. Right as we get off the plane, some of us get interviewed, we're on the news, and we finally get back to school, and we all get to take a nap because we've been up our plane left at like 10 o'clock at night in Kathmandu, so we were up all that day, and then another 20 hours of flying, so we were probably up for 40 hours. We were all super exhausted, and we all just crashed, and that was pretty much my trip. So I'd just like to thank you again for all who supported. It was a great time, and I'm just excited to know what God did, and I'm just glad to share it with you.
In Matthew in chapter 25, page 539, in the Bibles that we provide if you want to follow along, Matthew chapter 25, in verse 31, says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep and the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. And then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you? And then he will answer, saying, Truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The group from Nebraska Christian College had an opportunity to go and be the hands and feet of Jesus, to feed and to care for and to love on people who needed it. And I believe that it was God's providence that put them there at just that time so that they could be a part of what was taking place. But I want you to know that Connection Christian Church, we're not all going to get the opportunity to go to places like Nepal. Perhaps you can. Perhaps you can be there in the wake of an earthquake and minister to the needs of people. And perhaps God's going to bless you with resources that you can hand out water and blankets and things like that. But what God has given you and what God has given us is an opportunity to be the hands and the feet of Jesus right where He's put us. And so I would ask you to think, where has God placed you right now? What's your workplace like? What's your family like? Who has God put in your path that He's asking you to see the need, and He's given you the resources to be able to meet that need? Because at one day, we're all going to have to answer for what we did or did not do. Let's be the hands and feet of Jesus. We have a Connect 4 value system, and the number 3 on there is to love. Like when we understand the unconditional love of God, we can now extend that unconditional love to His people. We love God and we love His people. How do we do that? It's expressed in service. May we continue to serve the people around us, whether that's in an organized church activity or that's just you on your own doing your own thing. God has blessed you for just a time as this to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Amen.